and welcome. You're watching NewsX and I'm Vaishali Kohli. Now today marks the 7th day of the ongoing chaos amid flight cancellations across India. Amid the ongoing crisis, the Ministry of Civil Aviation has ordered IndiGo to clear all pending passenger refunds without delay. Airlines have also been told not to impose rescheduling charges on passengers whose travel plans were affected. The ministry warned that any delay of non-compliance in processing refunds will trigger immediate regulatory action. However, the flight prices, despite the MoCA's fare caps, continue to be high. I have my guest joining me on the broadcast, and I want to begin by Sharath Panicker, who's a former captain of Boeing 787 Dreamliner. He served as a captain with Air India. He's also a former DGC inspector. Captain all right. So I want to begin with you, Sharath. Now, how do you see this progressing? Because this is, of course, a big crisis situation that NewsX has been reporting on for the past few days. How do you see this moving forward? And I'd like your opening comments before that.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely, Sharath.
Okay, first, thank you for having me on your show. I would like to start by saying that, in my view, this is sheer blackmail. The first car, the civil aviation requirement, has come way back in 2024, the first revision. In Jan, the second revision in March 2024, with an implementation date of 1st of July 2024. Now, understandably, the airlines threw up and the court had to intervene. And finally, Delhi High Court had passed a judgment wherein a two-phased implementation of the CAR, the civil aviation requirement, would be effective. Phase 1, with 15 clauses, was to be with effect from 1st of July 2025, that is this year, with the remaining 7 clauses to be effective from the 1st of November 2025. IndiGo had almost 2 years to prepare. But clearly, their line of thinking and their attitude towards the regulator, the flying public at large, has been sad, to say the least. And they have not planned for it because the primary condition of this car, the civil aviation requirement, is management of fatigue. Fatigue both with the cockpit crew as well as the cabin crew. The ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, in its Annex 6 Part 1, which regulates and tries to manage fatigue risk management systems, or the FRMS, has given a certain prescriptive fatigue management regulation policy, based upon which the Indian DGCA frames out their civil aviation requirement. And once the CAR is implemented, it is law. Violation of the law would invite consequences. Clearly, IndiGo did not take this seriously, probably assuming that their 60% plus market share would make them too big an airline to fail on any aspect. So they have not done the necessary inductions, they have not done the necessary trainings, which is the reason why on the final date at which they could not manage anymore, they just threw up their hands, which resulted in this mass inconvenience to the public. It is clearly mismanagement, to which they have admitted to, but I would hold them directly responsible, and I would imagine that the regulator would impose costs upon them, both in terms of monetary penalties as well as all other applications that are available to the law. It is clearly a violation of the law, and in my opinion, they thought that they could get away with it, and the general pressure of the traveling public being inconvenienced to this extent would put pressure upon the government and the DGCA, and they would capitulate. In fact, they have capitulated because they have given an extension up to the, I think, the first week or the second week of February next year to get their house in order.
All right, Sharath. Now, initially there were some reports coming that, some analysts and pilots had mentioned that the crisis was a deliberate strong-arm tactic by the airline's management to force the government to relax the new FDTL regulations. What do you have to say for that?
Okay, let's just examine this a little carefully. worldwide airlines are grappling with this issue of pilot fatigue. What is pilot fatigue? Pilot fatigue is basically management of your rest periods in such a fashion that the flights are operated safely, both for the cockpit as well as for the cabin crew. ICAO had recognized this very earlier on. All airlines have grappled with it. And finally, they have issued directions that each regulator within each country, there are 195, about 193 members or countries of the ICAO. And ICAO will give out directions in the form of SAPs, that is the standards and recommended practices, which each country or each regulator will examine, see the degree of applicability to them, and if it agrees with the ICAO recommendations, it is implemented in the form of a local rule or a local law. In India today, the authority is vested with the DGCA, and the DGCA converts these standards and recommended practices of the ICAO into CARS, which stands for Civil Aviation Requirements. This is basically to manage fatigue. Studies have been carried out by the ICAO as well as by various other agencies, and including in-house studies by various airlines who have submitted them to the regulators, and onwards the regulators have submitted these studies to ICAO, based upon which they've made these recommended practices. Now, the CAR or the Civil Aviation Requirement attempts to lay down what should be these regulatory practices, and it is left it to the operators to work out, the operators meaning the scheduled air transport operators, to work out their own flight duty time limitation schemes. Now it has given them a certain amount of a window in terms of the definitions, in terms of how you define a night. Even within fleets, you can define a night, let's say between 12 o'clock at midnight to 6 in the morning, maybe from 11 o'clock at night to maybe 5 in the morning. They've given them a window in which to choose. And once the airlines have chosen these windows, they have made their own flight duty time limitations, they submit these to the regulator, namely the DGCA, for approval. And once it is approved, it is implemented. So basically the core issue out here is pilot or cabin crew fatigue. How do you manage fatigue? And the CAR is stipulating the directions by which each airline is obliged to carry out its rostering practices. Now, every operator will try and do what is called almost a cut-to-cut utilization of its crew. The moment an application finds that, let's say, I am available, my duty time has finished at this particular point in time, my mandated rest is so much, and thereafterwards I am available to the company. So this tends to be almost a cut-to-cut operation. Now, IndiGo, over the last couple of months and over the period of nearly a year, has expanded its footprint. Whether they have correspondingly increased the number of pilots anticipating the date of effectivity of the CAR, it is not too clear. But clearly they have admitted to operational lapses in terms of planning, in terms of manpower management, in terms of inductions. Air India, on the other hand, has carried out, I think, a sizable amount of inductions, and it is clearly ready for it. But concessions, as has been accorded to IndiGo, can never be one-sided. You cannot have one part of the civil aviation applicable only to one air scheduled transport operator and not to the other. So I think it was, in my opinion, amounting to a blackmail, and hoping that the general pressure of the traveling public would make the operator and the government capitulate.
Mr. Panicker, thank you for joining me on the broadcast.